So I think now we can start while everyone is joining us. So please, Lancina, over to you. Lancina, you can start, please. You are muted. Sorry. Lancina, you are muted. Maybe you can unmute yourself. You can start. Apologies.
It's okay now? Yeah.
Yes, it's okay.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much to join us on our monthly webinar. The topic today is nuclear waste as heritage of the future. What archaeology teaches us about 100,000 years communication. Welcome everyone to our exploration of a truly interdisciplinary challenge, communicating with the far future. We are gathered to discuss nuclear waste, specifically a long-life radioactive material, not just as a technical waste problem, but has a long-term heritage that we are leaving for generation 100,000 years from now. Nuclear waste demands secure storage for up to 100,000 years, posing a unique challenge in communication, danger, and across vast temporal distance. Archaeology offers insight into long-term site preservation and the limitation of human communication over millennia, treating repository as future heritage. The 100,000 years challenge, our immediate challenge is creating geological repository, but our long-term challenge is communication. We must ask, who can we ensure language and even symbol may feel long window into the future by studying how material, sample, and structure have or have not lasted over centuries. We can learn how futures society might interact with our waste. The paradigm shift. We are moving from thinking of nuclear waste only has a risk to be hidden to thinking of it as an objective that will be discovered and interpreted. The session will explore how we can provide future generations with the best condition to create their own understanding of this our technology legacy. Today, we will cover nuclear semiotics, how to design symbol for the future, the challenge of deep geological storage, and what archaeology teaches us about the resilience of human memory. As a conclusion thought, as a researcher in the field heritage feature suggests, treating nuclear waste as future heritage allows us to see this site has a unique intergenerational conversation, turning a technology liability into an exploration of our shared human future. This day, this webinar, we have young ladies as a moderator, Perdita Rosidi, PhD Royal Institute of Technology, Sweden Master student in nuclear energy engineering. Pradita Rosidi is a master student in nuclear energy engineering at Kitesh Royal Institute of Technology. Kitesh, student with a bachelor degree in nuclear engineering from University Gajah in Manda, Indonesia. Her academic journey combines a strong foundation in nuclear engineering with hands-on research and applied technology experience. Pradita has conducted research in nuclear reactor safety, strengthening her analytical skills and understanding a risk-informed approach to safe reactor operation. In addition, she has gained practical experience in groundwater carbon dating, demonstrating her interest in interdisciplinary application of a nuclear technique for environmental and geoscience challenge. Through her studies and research, she is developing expertise at the intersection of nuclear safety, engineering analysis, and applying nuclear method with a focus on contributing to safe and responsible nuclear energy development. Thank you. Pradita, the floor is yours.
Yes. Let me introduce our speaker today, Professor Cornelius Holtorf. Professor Cornelius Holtorf is a professor of archaeology and holder of the UNESCO Chair on Heritage Futures at Linnaeus University in Kalmar, Sweden. His research focuses on how societies create, preserve, and communicate knowledge across long-time horizons, especially in context of uncertainty and global change. Since 2011, he has worked extensively on memory across generation in relation to deep geological repository for nuclear waste, collaborating with nuclear waste management organization and international bodies. Educated in archaeology and anthropology at the University of Tübingen, Reading, Hamburg, and Wales, Limburg, where he earned his PhD. He has held academic position in Sweden, the United Kingdom, and Portugal, including research and teaching roles at the University of Cambridge. Professor Cornelius' work bridge archaeology, heritage studies, and future thinking, offering unique insight into long-term responsibility, public trust, and intergenerational communication. Now, for the next in our agenda, the presentation from Professor Cornelius Holtorf.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me in this series, and thanks Pradita for the introduction. I'll use this way of presenting so you can see me the entire time, and I'm not just showing a PowerPoint. So the topic that I want to address is this one which you suggested. It's heritage of the future, what archaeology teaches us about 100,000 years communication. What I want to offer is give you the story of what I'm doing as an archaeologist in relation to nuclear waste, and why that matters to have an archaeological and a heritage perspective, and what are the conclusions of our work. What do we suggest that maybe people in the nuclear waste sector, those responsible, should be considering in their work. So that is the plan, and I have about half an hour for that, and there will be time at the end to address some questions. So please do think about what you would like to comment on or ask at the end. So let me start by just showing you our logo. As Pradita was saying, it's a UNESCO Chair on Heritage Futures, and I've been holding that since 2017, and it's been renewed twice until now, in every 4 years, in 2021 and 2025. So you may be wondering what UNESCO chairs are, because that is they're not that common, although they are actually quite a lot. There are over 1,000 worldwide, but and in all disciplines. But the most important thing is that they are not research chairs, so it's not about just conducting research projects, but UNESCO defines them as think tanks or bridge builders that operate between the academic world, civil society, local communities, research, and policy making. So it is really about making an impact in society, not only through research, but also through all kinds of interactions with policymakers and also communities. So in that spirit, I'm happy to contribute to this series and meet you with my ideas and hear also your responses later on. You may be wondering what heritage futures means, because it's not yet a very common term. So heritage futures is not about predicting the future in any way, and it's not about preserving the heritage for the future or for as long as possible, which one might think. But our definition is the one you see here on screen. So heritage futures is about the roles of heritage in managing the relations between present and future societies. So obviously we are very concerned in the present with what we leave behind for the future, but also how we have to assume certain responsibility for future generations. And heritage has an important role to play in that context, and that is what we are concerned with. Now, as Perdita says, I've been working with nuclear waste since 2011, so this started before the UNESCO Chair, and one could say that actually it's this issue that has led us into this work, and also the UNESCO context of futures thinking. So that's why this is a key case study for thinking about the future in relation to heritage. I also want to point out what we're trying to achieve in the bigger context as a UNESCO chair. So we have a vision, which you see here, and our vision is to build global capacity for futures thinking among heritage professionals. That's the primary vision. So I appreciate that this particular audience today is not heritage professionals, but that doesn't really matter, because we have sort of gradually developed a second focus that is about promoting culture and heritage thinking in the future sector, and so maybe that is closer to where you are, but it doesn't really matter. It's just for you to understand on what we primarily are doing. So we are trying to improve futures thinking in the heritage sector. Right. You may wonder how an archaeologist first got into this question about futures thinking, and I just want to mention this particular book, which is the one that inspired me first about futures thinking, and this is, you can probably read it. It's Gregory Benford's book Deep Time, and this is about 25 years old, or just a little bit more. It was published in 1999, and I got it maybe 2 years after that. And Gregory Benford is a physicist, but he's also a science fiction author. And in this book, he describes in detail 2 case studies that have been inspiring me. And one of them is nuclear waste repositories, and how to keep memory across generations over very long time periods, up to or even beyond 100,000 years, which is mentioned in the title of this lecture. And I immediately understood that, well, this is an archaeological question, because it is about communicating through material culture over very long time periods. So we're just looking at time in a different directions than what archaeologists are often doing. We're not looking backward and trying to figure out what it meant, what past generations left behind and what we find again today. But it's to look into the future, what we leave behind today, that we hope future generations will understand in a particular way. So in that sense, it's very archaeological. And just to mention that a second chapter in this book, Keep Time, is about space messages. And that's a very different kind of case study, but it's also very archaeological because, again, you leave behind a time capsule, so to speak, a closed archaeological find for eternity, for if there is ever anybody in space to find that, to look at that, then it's like an archaeological find from Earth. And in that sense, even that's a very inspiring topic for an archaeologist. And I've also been working with space messages, but that's not what the present topic for this lecture is about, and maybe we can do that some other time. So this is how it started, and when we had our first project in 2011 on these ideas, this was in the context of the OECD, which I wrote this in some detail on the slide because this is really something you should check out if you're not already familiar with that. The OECD has a body that's called the Nuclear Energy Agency, and actually they run conferences from time to time. And at the last conference on these issues, that's why I met Lancina too, who started the session today. And so that's how we know each other. And that was last autumn in Yokohama in Japan. But they've long been working with these issues. The NEA has existed for decades. And when I started this work in 2011, this was as part of an initiative that's known as the Records, Knowledge and Memory Initiative, RK&M, as they say. And the picture here, I can make this a bit bigger. This is the report that at the end of the project that was published in 2020, and it's still this is the basic reference point for a lot of the things I will be talking about. So if you're not familiar with that, take a look. It's available online. So this is how we got into the NEA work early on, and we were representing Sweden and specifically the Swedish implementer of policy. It's a company, a state-owned company known as SKB, and we were working with them for a few years in these early years, and we've really continued doing this in various forms since then. So We've done many things on this topic, heritage futures, and over the past 20, no, not quite 20 years, but 15 years, we've published a great amount of academic papers. And also this book, which you see here. This is a Routledge volume called Cultural Heritage and the Future, where we're making the case for futures thinking in heritage and also in archaeology. And as you can see from this picture, there is a nuclear site on the cover. And that's the site, the Swedish repository for high-level nuclear waste, which has, in the way that it is planned at the moment. And we put this on the cover because for us, this is the key case study for thinking about heritage futures. And inside the book, there are 3 or 4 chapters that concern nuclear waste management and these repositories. So this shows the relation, the close relation that this case study has always had, really, in our work with heritage futures, and the way that we want also future generations, students in our field, to become familiar with these issues of RK&M, records, knowledge, and memory across many generations in relation to nuclear waste repositories. So let's look at this this image at a little bit more detail and what it shows and how these repositories actually matter for the industry, but also for us. So as I said, this is the plant repository for nuclear waste in Forsmark. which is north of Stockholm in a municipality known as Östhammar. The state gave the permission to building this site a few years ago. So Sweden is the second country in the world where such a final repository is now being planned or built. The first country is Finland, where they've already come quite long, and this will probably be opened in not so very long in the future. So this is ongoing, the work in Finland, and Sweden will follow after that. Now, when you look, I don't know if all of you have seen pictures like that. You see on the surface there is the nuclear power station, but unrelated to the station, at the same place is also this planned final repository. And if you look at it in the way that this image shows it, it looks like an archaeological site. It looks like tunnels and chambers that are below the surface. Maybe not so very different from how graves have sometimes been built. I mean, just think of the Egyptian pyramids and the various channels and tunnels that are built there. So you can really almost see this as a future archaeological site. So the point of what we're trying to do, and why we've been briefed to get involved in this case study, is that if there are people in the future who, for one reason or another, dig at this place. And it could be archaeologists, but it could also be people looking for water or for any other kinds of resources. Then they will come across this final repository, even though it lies quite deeply. It's about 500 meters below the surface in granite geology. So it's not that easy to dig that down, but of course it can happen, and it may be machines who are more or less on their own are able to dig that deep in the future. You can imagine artificial intelligence doing things like that. So obviously we don't want nuclear material to come to the surface in any such process, and that's why information needs to be provided that tells people on what they may expect at that place, and so they can then make a judgment whether this is what they want to have or whether they should rather dig somewhere else where it's maybe safe and they would not hit such a repository. So that's the question of why that is why communication between generations across many millennia is essential. And the radioactivity of this material, of course, will be present for a very long time period in the future. And this is rather complicated in terms of physics, and I can't outline that for you in an easy way. I'm not sure I can do it in any way. But enough to say that it's a wide variety of elements that is present in this material, and some of that is radioactive for even more than 1 million years. So these are extreme time dimensions we are talking about. So that is the challenge that the archaeological expertise is needed for to meet. But there's also a political dimension here, because as you know, nuclear power has always been disputed in society because it has risks. And we've seen that in Chernobyl in the 1980s, but also in Fukushima, what can happen when something goes wrong. Now, these accidents that have happened on a few occasions, they did not relate directly to nuclear waste. So it's a completely different kind of material. These are not reactors we're talking about. But nonetheless, this is radioactive material that should not sort of enter the world of humans or of other beings on the surface again. It has a special properties, toxic properties that you want to protect yourself from and others from. So that means that the industry and politicians need to argue that they have found ways of addressing these risks and protecting life on Earth from this material. So it is effectively also a question of acceptability, whether they can say that they can safely take care of this material, or whether they say we have no idea what we're going to be doing with this material. So this is not our primary motivation, but of course it's something that we know our work will be used for, and that sort of lies in the background of any discussion of this topic as well. Right, so that's why we are communicating, and if we want to send a message or send knowledge to people up to 1 million years in the future or even longer, then this creates challenges that have never existed before. This has never been addressed by humanity at any time before, and there is nothing on Earth at the moment that has ever achieved communication over so long time periods. The oldest archaeological sources that contain complex information and have survived over long time periods, these are the Mesopotamian clay tablets, and they are about 5,000 years ago. So we're talking thousands of years here, not even 10,000 of years. So there's no precedent for anything like that. And the specific challenges can be described in these 3 ways that I have on the slide here. So first, it is a question about physical durability of the medium that is chosen to convey messages. And that is not a trivial point, because many materials that we commonly use, they do not easily survive what could happen below the surface for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. But there are some materials that do survive very well, and there are studies that have been looking at that. Now, funnily enough, the archaeological clay tablets, this is actually a format that is still considered today, and that has proved to be extremely versatile and extremely applicable in these sort of cases, because you can very easily write on carve information into these clay tablets. You can burn them. They will survive very long. And even if they break, which is something that can happen, they can easily be put together as well, which a CD-ROM, for example, can't. So that's why clay tablets are often seen in suggestions for creating physically durable materials in the context of nuclear waste repositories also. But the physical aspect is only one. I mean, that can be solved by engineers, and there are a range of options. All this, some are very expensive, some are easier to inscribe than others, and so on. But there are solutions. Now, the second level of complexity is about language comprehension, because in what language should we communicate in order to achieve communication with people in hundreds of thousands of years in the future? There isn't really any language that we can rely on will be understood over so long time periods, and this is much more difficult to address. But there are the proposals that have been made. Or the one that you read most often about is about being inspired by the Rosetta Stone from Egypt. So that means to convey the same information in several different languages, and then hoping that that will help future readers to compare them, and in that way to be able to make inferences about the meaning of particular letters and particular words in different languages, and as they did with the Rosetta Stone, where they understood one of the languages better than the others, and maybe something similar would happen again. And maybe we're not even talking about 1 million years in the future. Maybe we're talking about much shorter time periods, and then people are able to translate this information into their own language or several languages, and that means it could survive in that form. So this is difficult, but even that maybe could be worked out if it is sort of every few hundred years maybe translated into new languages. Now, the last point is the really difficult nut to crack, and that is, how do we know how people will interpret the messages we may want to leave for them, and what sort of meaning will they give to them? And this is not predictable. We see what archaeologists have been doing when they read messages, for example, in the Egyptian pyramids, where there were messages that one should not open the graves because all sorts of things would be released, and these bodies should be kept safe and untouched. And of course, that only encouraged archaeologists to open that, because they were really curious to see what might be behind and who lies in this particular grave chamber. So it can have the opposite effect of what is intended. And at the time when these messages were created in Egypt, they didn't have any idea that there would be archaeologists who are interested in understanding the past for its own sake very, very often, and that this would create a kind of curiosity that would make them open these graves. So this is very difficult to address, and it would require really that the information needs to be translated much more often than every few hundred years, and much more frequently, and this is where we're heading in this document. I just saw that somebody sent a message in the chat. I can't really read it at the same time as I'm talking, so we can look at that later on. So what are the lessons from heritage based on partly on what I've just said, and also on how the heritage sector operates, and the sort of discussions we are having in that sphere. So first, I think from what I've said just now, you can already understand that we need to manage change, not continuity. So it's not about creating a message that will be unchanged over hundreds of thousands of years and then eventually be read in maybe in a million years, and will help people then to make the right decisions. That is very unrealistic. It has never happened before, and even that they can read the same language, and that they and even if they do that they will give it a similar meaning to what we do is rather unlikely. So this is a different approach than what the nuclear sector is conventionally addressing at the moment, because they are composing messages that are not to be changed, but that are to be transmitted as they are to future generations. But in heritage studies, we know that nothing ages faster than the future. The views of what we want to or have to communicate to future generations is changing regularly. We don't look at the future in the same way today as people did 100 years ago, and that will probably continue. But it's also true that nothing is more difficult to predict than the past. Even perceptions of the past have changed many times, and people in the Middle Ages had a very different perception of the past than people today, and we don't know what people will believe or think is valuable and important about the past in 1,000 years or 10,000 or 100,000 years from now. So it's all about addressing change. And then there's the second set of lessons. And that is a trend that we see in heritage studies for a few during the recent decades developing, and that is that we are looking more not at objects that we try to conserve or to make sure they are safe for the future, but we're much more looking at people and their interests and their well-being, and how that can be supported through heritage. So heritage is the means by which people have better lives, not the other way around. It's not the objects of heritage that people should feel obliged to work for, and that is a change of perspectives. We don't know what future heritage studies will work with, and of course there may be different additional or also quite maybe completely different priorities. But I think the point what we can take from this is still valuable, and that is that it's not important what something is, but what it does and what is done to it. And if we think about that, then nuclear waste is not preserved for for physical reasons, because it is radioactive, which it is. But that's not the point for keeping it safe in these repositories and conveying information about it. The point is that we don't want people to be at risk as a result of facing these objects in an unprotected way. So it is really about what the object can do to people and what people could do to these repositories when they don't have the right information. So that's why we are talking about heritage processes rather than heritage objects that we should focus on. And these are this is something we're also working with in NEA at the moment. So if you wonder what nuclear waste actually can do, that is relevant, and some of that is maybe something we want the nuclear waste to do, and other things, especially the first one here, is something we don't want nuclear waste to do. So this is where we need to work out strategies of what to inspire and encourage and what maybe to avoid. These are just shows you a variety of things, because there are a number of things there that we don't give so much thought to normally in relation to nuclear waste. Now, the first is what you already know, that obviously nuclear waste can harm our bodies or can harm any living beings' bodies. So that we know and that we try to avoid. But there are many other things it can do. For example, nuclear waste can stimulate our minds in an amazing way. And that's why we use it in heritage studies. It can inspire even other sectors, for example, the cultural sector, to think about long-term futures in a way that few other examples can do. So it boggles our minds to even think what may happen in 1,000,000 years from now, because there may not be Homo sapiens in 1,000,000 years from now. It wasn't there 1,000,000 years ago either. So these things, everything can change. It can also make us curious to find out more. That is something that is quite likely. Nuclear waste has very special characteristics. It affects the closest environment. It may well be that people in the future or other beings will get very curious and start digging, try to find out more about it. That's something we have to think is likely to happen. It may also tell us more about energy production at our time. It's the story of nuclear power, basically. It can offer us cautionary tales about political responsibility and also political failure, because there are very many examples where politicians have lied to people about these repositories. For example, in Germany, where the whole search for nuclear repositories has restarted a few years ago, and so this is also something to be learned from nuclear waste. And finally, nuclear waste has also been one of the defining aspects that motivated people to get engaged in politics and to get become environmental activists during the 1970s, when the Green Movement started in Europe, and that wouldn't have happened in the same way if it hadn't been for nuclear waste. So that is a very positive thing. It can also mobilize people to become politically active, and maybe that's something that we want to retain in the future. So I said earlier that in the chair, we are building global capacity for futures thinking among heritage professionals, but in this case, also for nuclear professionals, so to speak. So how do we do that? How do we address all these different things that nuclear waste can do, might do, and that maybe we don't want it will do? And the key here is that is an approach known as futures literacy. That is a concept developed by UNESCO. And we've been working with that in the nuclear context for many years. And in fact, this June, we will run the second Futures Literacy workshop in Paris at the OECD for the NEA. So this will be a way of applying these ideas to in relation to those people who are responsible for nuclear waste management, and also some local communities and implementers in the world. So what does futures literacy mean? And I'll go through this quite quickly, and then we'll also reach the final aspect here of this lecture. So futures literacy is a capability, and it has 3 dimensions. So first of all, it makes us become aware of our assumptions about the future, because we assume so many things about the future necessarily throughout our lives. And we have a benefit from understanding these assumptions. Secondly, futures literacy is about learning to imagine multiple alternative futures, so we can see the future in a range of different ways. And finally, it's about reframing our strategies in the present. It changes our view of how we should address future issues once we have become more futures literate. Just a very short example. This is how we portray and how we bag, so to speak, nuclear waste conventionally in these tons, but it's full of assumptions. Will this be radioactive waste for future generations? Will this even be seen as a risk, or maybe it will be seen as a resource, as something positive? We shouldn't just assume these things. It will still be radioactive, but how this will be conceived is unknown, and we should not assume that it will be perceived in the way that we do. Secondly, there are multiple futures also for nuclear waste, and it is perfectly conceivable that nuclear waste will be seen as a blessing and a challenge in completely different ways than how we see it today. If you are not familiar with the work of James Accord, then I recommend that to you. If you Google that, this particular lecture here from 2010 in Barcelona, you find a very inspiring lecture where he gives you a view of nuclear waste that is mind-blowing, and is a completely different thing than what you've ever heard of. So this is just one example how varied nuclear waste may be perceived, and it can open all our minds really on what is in this material, or what might be in this material. And finally, this should reframe our strategies in the present. This here is one depiction of a message from the 90s, when these repositories were portrayed as in terms of very apologetic terms, and it starts by saying this place is not a place of honor. So the present apologized for even leaving something like this behind for future generations, and that's certainly not the approach one should have today, as our views of what this is or could be has already shifted a lot, and the current policy is very different. So it shows that how these reframing exercises always take place, and they should take place in even more radical ways when we consider the work of people like James Accord, artists like he was in this case. Right, so this is my conclusion, and I want to finish, make sure that there's time for some discussion. So futures literacy, which we are applying to nuclear waste and talking to the NEA, in the NEA context to the sector, is about embracing change and variability of approaches to nuclear waste, rather than much more simple and clear-cut messages about the material that is stored there and the properties it has. All that is subject to change. It's also about facilitating translation in regular intervals. So we cannot assume that there's a continuity that means that our languages and our terms and what we want to convey will even be understood in the future or make any kind of sense in the future. So we need to have a translation process, and that's what we need to create, rather than a message that will be current for all times. And this implies that the material also will need to be retrievable in a different way than what is planned at the moment in most of these sites, if not all of these sites, because as things change, people may want to get back to it much sooner than or much longer, I should say, than is commonly assumed in the sector at the moment. Right, so if you want to find more on what we're doing, go to this link, our webpage for the UNESCO Chair. There you find all sorts of things. And with that, I just want to thank you for listening, and hope that you have some interesting comments and questions at the end of that now. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Cornelius, for the presentation. There is one question in the chat. Will it be reasonable to argue that we are better equipped to leave message and in the fire, particularly due to our intentional effort, than past civilization like the Mesopotamians?
Well, yeah, sorry, let me just read this again. I've opened the chat. There are various messages from an AI assistant. Where's the question? Yeah, there.
The one part.
Marcio, yeah, I have it. Well, I mean, whether we're better equipped today than in Mesopotamia, well, we're better equipped in a technical sense. So we can choose, among different options how we want to leave a message. And maybe in Mesopotamia they had fewer options, so we have high technology and so on. But I don't think we're intellectually better equipped, because the question of changing meanings, I mean, that's the same in Mesopotamia and today, and the fact that over long time periods circumstances will change in different ways, and there will be different concepts being used and different things making sense. Like in Mesopotamia, a lot of these material, these are letters or these are records of who had debts to somebody else at the time, and there were specific messages that were significant as such at the time. But of course today, when archaeologists look at that, and nobody cares if anybody had specific debts to somebody else, but it's a source that gives us insight into how social relations, for example, were organized in ancient Mesopotamia. So it's a much different, a much broader interest that people have in that today. Are there any other questions or points?
First of all, let me say a few words. First of all, thank you so much for this very interesting lecture, Professor Holtorf. I think when it comes to nuclear energy, everybody asks, and so about the waste. So there seems to be a plan, for a long-term plan to take care of this issue. And as you say, we are unable to look so far into the future. I'm also wondering, in addition to what you have said, how we can ensure that the institutions stay in place that will hand on this knowledge from one generation to the next, because things are changing so fast, and there has to be some mechanism to ensure that this information is indeed passed on and translated into the next generation's language, etc., on an ongoing basis over the next many generations.
Yeah, good question. Of course, that cannot be assured. There's no answer to that. And I know in Sweden they recently had a law passed because a similar question came up here. Who has the responsibility when the industry no longer exists? Because clearly there will not always be nuclear power as an industry. They have the responsibility now, and there is a way of financing that now. But that will not exist when the industry, when we only use like wind and sun energy, then even though at the moment it goes the other way, and Sweden will build new nuclear power stations like many other countries, but eventually this will end. And so in Sweden, the decision has been made that the government will take over responsibility eventually when the industry no longer exists. But of course, who says for how long the Swedish government will exist? I mean, we're all aware that Sweden is preparing for war at the moment, and in Sweden they think that Russia will attack within a few years. And I don't think that is true. But if it is true, then and if they win, then maybe there's no Swedish government in 20 years from now. It's not very likely, but maybe in 100 years it's a different situation where this could happen. And who is responsible then? So that's exactly the point of RK&M, of this initiative, and why archaeologists working with that, because the idea is to leave information in the ground below the surface that does not need institutions. But as soon as people sort of come across that, it should encourage them to be curious, to find out more, and then to translate that information into a different format for the future from then on. So, but this is not extremely reliable. We cannot be confident that this will happen in every case, and that is why all these designs in Sweden and Finland, and also the others that are being prepared at the moment, they all assume that, or it's more than an assumption, they have knowledge that shows that these repositories are safe as such, so they don't need people's attention in order to maintain safety around of this material. Of course, things can still happen. There may still be what they call inadvertent intrusion. That what I mentioned earlier, that people may be drilling without knowing what is below that. That could still happen, but otherwise, it's safe as it is. That's the intention. And there's a lot of argument whether this is true or whether there are doubts about that. But they clearly try to minimize these doubts and do everything they can to prevent this from happening. So there isn't a final answer to that, but people are aware and doing the best they can.
All right.
Any
If
other?
there is any other question?
Hello, everyone. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sohnembe. I'm from Senegal.
Hello.
I am a PhD researcher in nuclear technology applied to climate change. I went to thank Professor for this wonderful session. This was very informative and we learned a lot of thank you. So my question is, how can this long-term communication strategies be adapted to regions like Africa, where cultural transmission is often oral rather than written? Thank you.
Yeah, very good questions. There are not many African countries involved in these discussions at the moment, and maybe one reason is that nuclear energy is much more common in other parts of the world, in Europe, in Asia, and also North America. But that's not the only answer, of course, to that. And I hope there will be more people from Africa involved in this question. But you're right that one may think in different terms in African context, that it's about maintaining continuity in traditions and through what is known as intangible heritage. It's not necessarily more reliable, but it's a different way of thinking, because a lot of the heritage in African, and certainly sub-Saharan Africa, I should say, is sort of very well developed as far as living traditions are concerned. That certain dances, for example, or music or stories can be transmitted over a very long time period, and maybe this is also a way of keeping memory alive. More work would have to be done, and maybe it's appropriate that this work will be directed by Africans when the time comes that these issues need to be addressed even in Africa. So generally, these are global issues, but there are local or regional varieties in the world, and Africa has a particular strength in intangible heritage.
Will there be any other question from the attendants?
Maybe we can have last question, Perdita, before we close the session today.
Okay, so I probably want to ask a little bit, because you also work with the NEA. I guess that means you work with a lot of different type of stakeholders. I'm interested about how you decide, because I think in technical perspective, we just think about how to make this material to be safe enough to be put under this deep placement, but then the communication aspect is still issues that is hard to deal, but also in your perspective is also hard to deal. So how to get this common ground to actually deal with it, especially with different countries and even like different generation ahead.
Mm. Yeah, that's exactly the reason why we meet in these contexts. There are a whole range of different expert groups on all these topics, and this is the topic of a couple of them. And as you said, all stakeholders are welcome in these groups, and so there are local communities from Östhammar, for example, in Sweden, but also from other parts of other communities around the world. And there's a lot of open discussion. It's really about trust building through complete transparency, that everybody is considered in the same way. It's not that regulators or governments have a different position, or the industry has a different position. They're all sitting in the same room and talking to each other. So I think this is really important, that nobody hides any information from anybody else. Of course, at the same time, this is not a decision-making body. It's advisory, but it has quite a high profile also for governments and people. Different institutions consider the information that is being put out by this body, by the NEA. So yes, it's all about being inclusive, being open for everybody, transparency. Also, a lot is available online on their web pages, and that is at the heart of that. And I think we have learned over the past decades that this is the only way in which you can address topics like that. So to avoid the kind of controversies that we've seen in Germany, but also in France and in some other countries. And I think it's working rather well. We don't have very many big disputes in these groups. Everybody is amicable and open, and everybody wants to learn and hear from everybody else. So Lansina was in Yokohama and probably had the similar impression there. It's a very open and friendly atmosphere at these meetings, and that's how it should be.
I see. So it's already 8 p.m. I guess if there is no other question, we can end the session. I will hand to Florentina. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pradita, and thank you everyone for this wonderful discussion that we have today. So I would just like to say a few closing remarks as we come to close today's session. I would like to thank everyone for being part of this important and thoughtful, provoking conversation. Today's webinar, Nuclear Waste and Heritage of the Future, What Archaeology Teaches Us About 100,000-Year Communication, has reminded us that nuclear waste management is not only a technical and regulatory issue, but also a deeply human one. It is a responsibility, memory, ethics, and the relationship we choose to build with future generations. People we will never meet, but to whom our decisions today will matter profoundly. So I would like to express our sincere gratitude to Professor Cornelius for sharing his unique perspective and for challenging us to think beyond conventional timeframes. His work shows us how archaeology and heritage future can offer powerful tools to rethink communication, trust, and long-term governance in the nuclear sector, particularly for newcomer nuclear countries navigating public confidence and societal acceptance. A special thank you to our moderator, to Pradita, for expertly guiding the discussion and the Q&A session, helping bridge perspectives across engineering, social science, and policy. So your role was essential in making this dialogue accessible and engaging for a diverse audience. And we also extend our appreciation to Lansina To and the Newcomers for Nuclear Global Team as well as to everyone behind the scenes who contributed to organizing this session. And finally, thank you for all the participants, students, professionals, and colleagues from around the world who joined us today. So your engagement reflects the growing recognition that building a responsible nuclear future requires interdisciplinary thinking, openness, and long-term vision. So we hope you leave this session with new insights and questions that will continue to shape your work and discussions. So we really look forward to welcome you to our future. We look forward to welcome you to our future webinars. And thank you once again. We wish you to have a very good rest of your day. And we will drop some of the contact points of Newcomers for Nuclear Global, as well as social media, inviting you to follow us around. So thank you very much. Over to you, Lancina and Mrs. Eva, if you would like to say something before we close today's session. Thank you.
Allow me to express my gratitude to our excellent speaker today. I think this was a really insightful session, and a lot of things I have not been thinking about before, and I've learned a lot today. So thank you very much for that. Thank you also very much to the moderator for the professional moderation, and to all of you for your participation, and of course to my team, Florencia and Lancina, for organizing this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so I'm glad I was able to meet all of you. Good luck, and maybe we meet again, or keep in touch if you want. And I'm sure I'll meet some of you in the future on these conferences, maybe.
So thank you very much. Have a very good rest of your day, and please just stay connected with us. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.